Well, it's that time. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our first webcast session of 2025. Happy New Year to you. Welcome to this discussion on lessons on business value from the GBS School of Hard Knocks. Welcome from me. I'm Dan French. I'm in the wine cellar, as you can see. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Dean Czuma, who until very recently was running a 10,000 person GBS organization at McKinsey. Welcome, Dean. I think you're in Michigan today. What was that like?
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here with you. It was quite a learning journey, I would have to say. I mean, it started from an idea that the Shareholders Council had thought about in terms of really rolling up and thinking about how we deliver capability as a firm. And I think that I was right at the forefront of being able to be a part of it for so long and take the journey from almost a standing start and some really smaller and less scaled kind of things into a really powerful engine that really helped the firm move along. So it was quite exciting for a good long period of time.
Quite an experience. You got the bruises to prove it. So this is the School of Hard Knocks. So thanks very much, Dean. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so a lot of you have signed up for this. So it's obviously a topic that resonates. We're going to talk through. I've introduced ourselves. We're going to just talk a little bit about what's GBS here to achieve, because that's kind of a pretty key context. And then we're going to get to the root of the question: what is business value, and what does it mean to us, and what does it mean to our stakeholders, and why is it such a big challenge? I mean, it kind of would seem obvious, really, that any business should understand its business value, right? But we know it isn't quite as simple as that for global business services. So we're going to talk about the challenge, what's the big challenge, and what's the answer. Have a little bit of discussion. And this is going to be 30 minutes. It's going to be respectful of your time. We are going to, clearly, we won't be able to solve all the world's problems, but we will peel the onion a bit and see what we can get to. So, what is GBS here for? Well, we know that we hear a lot about cost optimization. Often the original business case is about cost optimization, and we hear a lot about value creation. We're all seeking this value creation opportunity, and we also know we're here to optimize and automate as well as operate. But what's your view, Dean? What is GBS here to achieve? What's the basis of our existence?
Yeah, thanks. The way I look at it is really to enable the company to really create strategic degrees of freedom and some agility that helps you flex and helps you move into places where maybe you couldn't have moved before. And it frees up capital, frees up capability, allows for concentrating experiences and flowing best practices and things like that. It's not just a place to drive, let's say, arbitrage or simply cost sub-optimization, I think.
And I guess creating agility for the organization, that irrespective of the center, the location of centers, we've got a place that can scale with the same pace as the organization, or even ahead of the organization.
And I think it went through, the concept has gone through phases over time. Started out by concentrating talent in one place and really focusing on a lot of energy there. But the onset of technology, the onset of the idea of morphing towards delivering work closer to where it's used, I think, and being able to just communicate and collaborate while serving a central function, I think, has been part of the transformation that GBS and global capability centers have taken on themselves. So going from the monolith to several smaller talent concentrations, I think, has been one of the magic pieces as well.
And maybe also the idea of taking away some of the distractions in any business, focus the business operations on the front to the customer, the real consumer, end customer, and taking some of the pain and effort away from that, so they can focus as much weight behind the arrow as they can.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And oftentimes that's one of the things, and we'll talk about that in a little while in terms of what some of the challenges are. But the perception of losing control needs to be, that gravitational pull needs to be overcome by the business value that the GBS function provides, and that it is successful, it's measured. Yes, they make mistakes. Yes, there's always fluid in the system, but to be able to do it consistently and do it better, I think, is part of the hallmark of a great GBS function.
Yeah, I agree. And then I love this little image here, this apple in the mirror, and I love this because it has so many metaphors for life and business. But I like it because things aren't always what they seem. In fact, I think, as we tend to find, they're very rarely what they seem, and our assumptions are usually wrong. But I think this phenomenon, as it applies to GBS, do we see GBS in the same way as our stakeholders? And I think this is a big kind of question as well, because it relates to the value discussion. If our perceptions, if we're seeing a different view of the shiny apple to the reality, does that kind of cause a little bit of does that cause an additional challenge, Dean?
Well, I think it depends what the investment thesis for the GBS function is and how it's communicated and how it's collaborated or driven together with stakeholders. And I think that the idea of a business unit leader thinking that there's just I just need you to reduce the variability in my AP, or I need to reduce my DSO or increase DSO or DPO, or pick on some metric of the day, I think is a really a powerful thing. But at the end of the day, when you look at the shiny apple and then and what's behind it, the GBS function has a whole lot of a view to things that the rest of the business just doesn't, and they can see the things that are strung together. So what I think is really powerful is that the sub-optimization or the optimization of one piece of the business is yes, definitely table stakes, but what can happen in the end-to-end if the end-to-end value stream is looked at, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. So we get to the critical question of this discussion. What is business value and what does it mean to our stakeholders? And I like this little image here because one of the things that is implied in this chart here is, some value, whatever it is, $1 million in 5 years' time is worth an awful lot less than the $1 million in 3 months' time. And so value isn't just an abstract concept. However you define it, it also has a time dimension, and I think sometimes in all areas of business we can sometimes forget that. But what's your take on the business value question, Dean?
Well, it definitely depends on what kind of a business that we're in. Are we thinking about delivering value to customers at scale in a consumer environment? Are we thinking about running the back office for a B2B kind of a platform? Are we thinking about the one aspect of the business, COGS or SG&A, or are we thinking about revenue optimization? So I think that the sky's the limit kind of for the GBS function, and I think that the trick there is in anchoring on what's most important. And I think the business value could be that we're suffering in trying to create a great experience at scale for our customers or our clients on a country basis or on a global basis. We're struggling to meet cost objectives while doing so. Well, I think there's a perfect example for how a GBS function can grow and morph into the capability to deliver something special at a cost advantage, and then leverage best practices by continuing to flow the continuous improvement and innovations into that channel, rather than having it be much more widely dispersed around around the enterprise, right? What have your clients seen, Dan?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think if you think about value in a customer relationship, value is only really perceived by the customer, and quite often on the delivery side, you might have views of what your value is, but your customers will tell you what it is. And I think the key, and that's true in GBS as well. Who are our stakeholders, and what do our stakeholders and the C-suite expect, and what do they mean by value? So obviously, key element in any business of value is the revenue. So the growth in revenue is key. Obviously, profit driven by the cost of goods sold. If you can improve revenue or improve profitability, that's a big deal. If you can improve the use of assets, so better use of assets we've invested in, that's great news. And obviously, if you can have a direct impact on a customer, and most GBSs don't tend to interact with the external economic customer directly. Some do, but if you can make an impact on that, that's powerful. Even if you can make an impact in terms of the customer experience, and then the ability to impact the product itself. Can we make a beneficial impact in the product that's both in design and delivery, and of course in terms of the people across the organization that are the face of the business. So I think these are the 6 kind of key kind of frames of value, and I think that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. And we've discussed that about some of these are very obvious. You can see them on the P&L and balance sheet. Some are less obvious. So the top 3, clearly, they're very evident in the company accounts. The bottom 3 are slightly more nuanced.
Yeah, so, and I think it's a really great frame. And I think that inside of all this, or reading between the lines, I think the magic is oftentimes in the GBS function and the let's call it the central talent or what have you. Taking on the culture and the vibe of the company or the firm. And I think that as we're thinking about this, it's not an arm's length kind of a relationship, or it's not like an outsourcing agreement. It's that the GBS function understands the culture of the overall company, lives and breathes it on a day-to-day basis, speaks the same language, and I think that's part of the evolution. I think that separates the great from the okay. And I've had numerous conversations with colleagues that have left our firm and then come back when I was helping on the McKinsey side, and there would be these conversations. Well, I learned a lot in my environment, in the GBS environment here. Then I got a promotion and I went to a big bank, and in the big bank, our operation was almost like a supplier, and we were not treated like the rest of the company, and we didn't really understand what the company did or what was most important. We were just doing something, kind of doing what we were told. And I think that and I've seen this come up multiple times where when a client comes into our location and sees what's possible, they say, wow, we've never done that. And I think the part of it is in creating the culture that drives the experience. And I think that that's a really big part of it. And when we were coming up with this concept, we talked about all the numeric value drivers, but we didn't talk so much about the experience drivers that really, it's really the input to the outcomes. And I think that's a really critical part of this whole thing.
So you made an interesting point there about the various centers. And I think one of the things I've observed is there's great value in wherever your centers are to make sure those centers happen to be located in operational units or in the physical premises of an operational unit, because then you can feel much closer. The GBS and service center folks feel much closer to real operations. They can feel the lifeblood rather than being in a completely isolated, separate location. And I've seen that working in different ways in different organizations.
Well, there was another really important aspect of that, in that when starting an office or starting a service line, having people that have done that for a long time within the construct of the company, whether it be at the central office or in a corporate headquarters type function, be paid forward and sit in the office and build the team and be part of it, so that there is a connection to that culture and connection to the urgency that the business has. And so I think, when I see some of these very large scaled operations, like a call center, for example, sometimes you miss that feeling, and you miss the taste of understanding the business.
No, that's a great point. On this topic, the elements of value and how you define it, Barbara Hodge of Shared Services and Outsourcing Network ahead of this, sent us a couple of reminders about recent report, and I found that this is right on the money. So the 2025 SSON Research and Analytics State of the Shared Services and Outsourcing Industry Report has a question: what earned you the greatest show of appreciation from your customers? This is GBS leaders. And 54% said creating value. And then much, under half of that was improving customer satisfaction. Again, 20% cutting cost and improving morale. But then the second question, which is really interesting, is how do you define value in your GBS organization? And the number one answer to that, 84% of people said cost optimization. So this kind of shows a slight kind of almost a dichotomy, and the topics of margin improvement, growth, and working capital improvement and revenue improvement are down at the 25 to 30%. And then, so when you come back to this, we talk about cost optimization, which is about creating profit, but we've got to remember that any cost optimization we do, to have any value, it has to flow through to the bottom line. It actually has to create some profit somewhere. So it's kind of interesting. There's clearly a debate, which this discussion is partly in response to, but this SSON report also shows some of that dichotomy, that we want to create value, but we keep coming back to, well, maybe we focus most of the time on cost optimization. And of course, we can only cost reduce our way to success for a short while. You can't do it forever. So interesting discussion there. So get to that point then. So we know value is a big question. We know we want to create more value. So what's the big challenge? What's getting in the way? Why is it so hard?
Yeah, oftentimes it's not about the actual transaction or the business process itself. What I've found in my experience is that it's that there needs to be an alignment between the HQ and the GBS function and the customer, all the way from the client or customer back into the back office, that's aligned on what it is we're trying to accomplish, and being collaborative and actually agreeing to what that is. And oftentimes, you've said it yourself, the GBS leader feels like he or she has a mandate from the CFO to drive out cost, and then the business unit leader feels like, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it at least as well as I can do it today, because I don't want to disrupt my flow, and I don't want to disrupt my customer experience. And there's a trust thing that doesn't happen. And so I think if there are competing agendas, or different silos are doing things differently, or have different measurements or different success factors, then I believe that's one of the biggest challenges that happens. And even when there's top-down alignment, the idea of, once you get down into the actual processes and into things, there might need to be some changes, and people need to be willing to say, we're going to make that change for the better. And we might even have a rough patch, and not be able to, we might not be as good as we could have been for a little while we're making the change. So there's got to be a lot of that trust and collaboration going back and forth in order to be successful.
Yeah, and that is hard to achieve when sometimes at the setup it's perceived of some supposedly low-level activities being centralized. Then the leadership on the revenue lines might not see it as important as it should be. So it's a big ask and a big challenge to step up there. I think this whole challenge is that whole, as you say, it's about collaboration, communication with all the stakeholders, not just the C-suite, but all the folks in the business unit and the regions and the functions. And there's that control versus influence dichotomy as well, because GBS, by its very nature, delivers niche services into the business. And those niche services, they fit into, they target, and they make a part of the end-to-end processes that deliver enterprise value. But they aren't the enterprise processes, they're just services into it. So there's this challenge between delivering a service as cost effectively and high quality with great experience as possible, but also which you can own, but then the ability to kind of enable the end-to-end process, which you clearly can't own because it's run across the business. And I think there's a big dichotomy and a challenge about how to have this dual operating model of thinking both ways, controlling what I can deliver, but then orchestrating and facilitating that end-to-end value creation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think too, if you double click on it again, it's also taking what's sitting out there is potential energy, right? There's processes that want to be changed, that can be changed, and whether it's using technology or using best-in-class ideas or changing how the process works, pushing more to self-serve, whatever that is, but really unleashing that potential energy, because the kinetic energy, or the potential energy, is we bought a new workflow system or we installed a new ERP. And then, the kinetic energy is that the outcomes support the spend, the investment capital, and all the time we put in order to drive the value, the value that the vendor told us, or that we actually signed up for, or the integrator told us, and meeting the expectation of getting the higher revenue or the lower cost, or the more streamlined processes. And I think that's something that really is it's something that businesses face a lot. And what I've seen in many situations is there would be an ERP system, there would be a CRM system, there's a workflow system, and a purchasing system, and all of those, a human capital system. All 4 or 5 of those enterprise systems have overlapping capabilities, and they're all being implemented possibly without looking at the end-to-end process. So HR implements the people system, and purchasing implements the procurement system, and the CFO puts the ERP in place, and they're looking at it from different angles instead of thinking about it more or less from an end-to-end perspective. And those companies that get that right, or understand the investments and the outcomes that they're actually trying to drive and looking across the entire business, are the ones that win.
I think that's a great point. I love this metaphor you brought here, Dean. I mean, if you look at GBS, and also in the CIO function role within technology and within GBS, we spend a lot of time and effort and money on building capabilities. And you mentioned the workflow system and ERP capabilities, all the rest of it. And we put all this immense energy in over a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, maybe more. And then sometimes by the time we get to the top of that hill, we're not always completely sure anymore about what direction to send the bicycle down the hill. And coming back to the cost and value discussion, big investments, these multi-year programs, are capitalized. So it makes operating costs look like it's going down, when it kind of, only if you're going to release a lot of operating efficiency once you deliver it. So this kinetic potential energy discussion is absolutely at the core of value creation in any organization, particularly in GBS. I just think it's a lovely way of thinking about it. So when we are building these capabilities, be very clear that we're capitalizing this because we're going to get long-term benefits. So we better be clear what the direction is we're taking it once we've built the capability.
Yeah, and I've seen this happen all too often, where the investment of the system ends up in the IT budget, and then the investment in the people and the processes ends up in the business's budget. And one of them might be earning, but then the annuity stream of the software keeps growing the bill on the IT side, right? And those costs just continue to explode while you're only taking advantage of a little part of it. So it might look like you're actually earning you're earning your capital investment back, but in reality, it's really more of a challenge. And so I think those aligned incentives, the aligned metrics on what the end-to-end value is for a particular project is really important. And many things start out that way, and then eventually they end up, some end up with losing sight of it, or forgetting it, or moving on to the next shiny penny. But it's a challenge to keep in front of us as we're thinking about that. Yes,
that whole discussion about capitalizing effort is an interesting point, which might be one of the reasons why we have a challenge in GBS. Because when you set up a GBS, normally that whole setup is a capital project which takes several years. It kind of, you're doing all that investment to drive economic improvement in the future.
Yep.
But of course, if you don't deliver it, once the capital program's over, if the costs don't look a lot better, you've got all sorts of challenges. So what is the answer? We know what the problems are. We've talked about those problems. What do we do to make sure we do deliver value that's understood and appreciated by our stakeholders in the C-suite?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan. And I think that the experience tells me that it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and it's not an easy answer. And I think starting with experimentation and being unafraid of making some mistakes, but also being engaged together as stakeholders of a business, with a common vision and a common approach and a common set of outcomes, is really, really important. I think above many things else, it's super important.
So that stakeholder engagement, making sure that we have got really good engagement, really good collaboration, really good co-ownership of outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think encouraging and developing the communications, the change management part, and I can't emphasize this enough. In working on a new, a really important change technology, a change platform, we found that for every dollar of technology or every dollar of software development or every dollar of software that you purchase, there's $3 to $4 of change management and behavior change needed across the enterprise in order to make this stick. And instead of it being something that I'm going to do because I was told to do it, but I'm going to keep all the stuff in the drawer and keep pulling out the Post-it notes or keep pulling out the old system and then spin up a shadow organization to do it the way I used to do it. In order to be able to do these things the right way, you have to, dust off what you used to do in favor of the future, and then commit to it. And the commitment is not just buying the software or buying the new process. It's really making a commitment to doing that. And I think that happens over time. It happens with humility, and it happens with people working together on what's really important, and then testing it and seeing that it doesn't work right, and then going back and doing it again, and being willing to, let's say, ditch investments early when they're not working out. And I think a lot of those things we get fairly dogmatic about, and we say, well, we've invested this money, we're going to keep pushing forward. And change is really expensive at the end. Change is really cheap in the beginning. And I think that's something else to keep focused on. Is failing fast is failing, I think, well in the process of being successful. And I know that sounds a little bit cliche, but it's really important as we're going through a transformation.
No, that's great. And I think this idea of focusing on thinking about stakeholders, particularly the folks that run the regions, the functions, the operating units, we've got to focus on enabling through this collaboration engagement, focus on enabling the big outcomes that define success for the business, not the things, thinking outside in, not inside out. So thinking about customers, revenue, cost of goods sold, inventory, cash, these are the things that matter. Those 6 points we looked at, and a focus on this dual operating model, I think, of service delivery and end-to-end process. Then there are different ways of thinking, different ways of behaving, but we've got to do both. So these are those 6 value levers, if you like, and I think we've got to make sure we're talking the right language. We're talking about these things with our stakeholders, and not just about the things that are important in the capabilities we're developing.
I think one other thing to mention here, Dan, before we end, is that measuring the important across the enterprise is really critical. If I'm measuring, for example, how fast my transactions are being processed, and the business unit leader is measuring satisfaction and revenue, we're measuring 2 different things. So I might be thinking that we're being very successful, but the business doesn't feel that way. So you've got to be aligned on what your goal is together and measure it. And then when you're satisfied with it, go on and measure something else. But I think that's really important that you're aligned on what you're measuring.
No, I agree with that. So as we kind of get some final thoughts around this, I mean, I think there's a couple of points. One thing is, I think it is important in any business and any function to take a step back, avoid drinking our own Kool-Aid, make sure we think about the apple. We might feel we want it to be a shiny apple, but it probably isn't a shiny apple at any particular point in time. We've got to be honest about it, build the right relationships, build a reputation, build the trust, and help build the outcomes that matter. And what's your closing thought on this, Dean, in that kind of context?
Well, I think that this is a concept that needs to grow over time, right? And I think that it's really powerful to have a little bit of humility, a little bit of, I would say, yes, assertiveness in terms of being able to identify and solve for business problems, but also to be, together, really cognizant of culture and thinking that, yeah, business processes are what they are, but are they things that we're actually moving the culture of the business forward with rather than changing it at the end of the day. So I think that the cultural aspect of this is very much more important, I think, than any one of the processes that might be changed.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a big topic. We've only just scratched the surface. Trying to be conscious of your time. 30 minutes, we're just about up. But each of the themes we've talked about are probably worth discussing further, spending some time with your teams, because this is, you're in the first month of the year. These topics are perennial topics and they don't go away. So that's probably worthy of thought. I'd like to thank you, Dean. It's been great to have you here. We've had several discussions over the months between Chicago and Michigan and London, and comparing our relative views. And if you've got any questions or you want to continue the conversation, you can contact both Dean and myself there. You will get a follow-up to this. If you didn't manage to attend, you'll get a copy of the recording. And with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. Wish you very best for the rest of your day and your week and your year even. So thanks, Dean. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.
Goodbye. Thank you. See you next time.